Yo, welcome back to the channel. Kamusta sa inyong lahat? Wuthering Waves has always been about high-intensity combat, flashy skill rotations, and building the perfect team comp. But lately, something feels oddly different. Suddenly, healers are dropping damage numbers that rival main DPS units. Tanks are slapping bosses like they owe them money, and squishy glass cannons, they're starting to look like an endangered species. Kuro Games isn't just giving us stronger characters, they're giving us characters that simply refuse to go down. So, is this the future? Are we heading towards an era where survival is just as important as damage? Buckle up, because today we're talking about how sustained DPS units are quietly taking over the future and the meta of Wuthering Waves. Note that this is a theory video and is highly speculative. Remember when sustained units were just there to keep your real DPS alive? But now, Kuro Games is throwing out that old school philosophy and giving us characters who laugh in the face of traditional damage dealers. Brant dishes out serious damage while mitigating damage with his sustain abilities. Cantarella provides both healing and coordinated damage with buffing abilities to boot. Zani, on the other hand, could potentially be the ultimate sustained DPS hybrid, possibly providing a cocktail of off-field healing, shields, and surprisingly massive DPS level damage. It's no longer just about keeping your main DPS alive these days. These sustained units are now the DPS, and that raises a huge question. Why invest in a fragile glass cannon when a sustained DPS can do just as much damage without constantly being on the brink of death? This shift isn't just power creep. It's a whole new philosophy in character design that Kuro Games is quietly implementing. And if sustained DPS continues to take center stage, we might be looking at a completely different meta in the near future. If sustained DPS units are becoming the norm, what does this mean for Wuthering Waves future content? Are we about to see bosses that hit like freight trains and laugh at glass cannon comps? Will Kuro Games force us to play beefy, self-sustaining units just to survive? Or maybe, just maybe, we're on the verge of peak power creep where no one dies and every battle is an unkillable slugfest. If your healer is doing more damage than your main DPS, does that mean healing is the new meta? The shift towards sustained DPS could signal a fundamental change in how we approach combat. Gone are the days of dodge-heavy, high-risk gameplay where a single mistake could wipe your team. Instead, we could be looking at a future where battles are more drawn-out wars of attrition, where the team that outlasts the other wins. And that raises the next question. If sustain is king, does that mean glass cannons are obsolete? If Kuro Games keep doubling down on sustained DPS, we might need to completely rethink how we build our teams. Why bother with dedicated healers when everyone can just heal themselves? Who needs a shielder when damage mitigation is seamlessly built into the character's kits? The way things are going right now, the future of Wuthering Waves might not be about burst damage and precise rotations. It could be a never-ending battle of unkillable warriors trading blows until someone finally taps out. At this rate, we might see entire teams composed of characters who just refuse to die, turning combat into a battle of attrition rather than a race for damage. Imagine future units boasting absurdly high sustain, stacking defensive mechanics, and passive healing tied directly to their attacks. The very concept of a fragile glass cannon may become obsolete, replaced by an era where survival endurance is the true measure of strength. Instead of dodging frantically and praying the boss doesn't one-shot you, the meta could shift towards prolonged battles where outlasting your opponent is the ultimate win condition. Who needs a healer when everyone heals themselves? Who needs a shielder when damage reduction is baked into kits? Maybe we should just accept that the future of Wuthering Waves is immortal warriors throwing hands endlessly until one of them finally runs out of patience, or maybe even stamina. Of course, more traditional main DPS units will continue to be released. That's a given. But at this point, it's becoming increasingly clear that Kuro Games is either generously gifting us with high sustained DPS units as a way to diversify gameplay, or they're setting the stage for a brutal difficulty spike that will make sustain absolutely necessary. Are they simply expanding our options, or are we about to face content so unforgiving that only the toughest, self-sufficient warriors will survive? Or maybe Kuro is just trolling all of us. Only time will tell. If Wuthering Waves difficulty suddenly skyrockets, we might know exactly who to blame. The absolute gigachads of the player base who constantly complain that the game is way too easy. You've seen them, soloing bosses without taking a single hit, demanding harder endgame content, and scoffing at anything that doesn't make them sweat. Of course, it's expected that players will eventually master the game's mechanics and overcome the learning curve, making previously difficult content seem trivial. But Kuro Games might be taking notes, and they might just be planning a difficulty spike in response. If this happens, sustained DPS units could become absolutely essential. Imagine future bosses that hit so hard and so frequently that traditional healers can't keep up. What if every enemy attack applies stacking debuffs that force players to cleanse constantly? What if enemy AI adapts to aggressive burst rotations, punishing squishy DPS who don't have built-in sustain? In this scenario, sustained DPS wouldn't just be useful, they'd be mandatory. Or maybe, just maybe, Kuro Games is planning something even crazier. What if they introduce a hardcore survival mode where players can only bring one character at a time and have to rely on sustain to survive multiple enemy waves? What if bosses start regenerating health, forcing players to stay in combat longer instead of bursting them down? The possibilities are endless, and with sustained DPS on the rise, we might be headed towards a game where the strongest units aren't the ones who deal the most damage, but the ones who refuse to die. Another major advantage of sustained DPS units is that they reduce the need for frequent character swapping in rotations, allowing for smoother, more efficient playthroughs. Instead of constantly switching between units to heal, to shield, or to apply buffs, sustained DPS units can handle multiple roles at once, streamlining combat. We've seen this in Brant, whose self-sustaining abilities, defensive perks, and high damage output allows him to solo some of the toughest challenges, including the most difficult tower in the Tower of Adversity. This growing focus on self-sufficiency isn't just a quality of life improvement, it's fundamentally reshaping the way players approach combat, prioritizing endurance and sustainability over fragile burst damage strategies. Whatever the reason is, Kuro Games seems to be doubling down on sustained DPS units. Heck, even the Rover has a healing capability when his Aero version comes out, refining their designs to be not just viable, but potentially essential for future content. This shift is not just about variety, it signals a growing emphasis on longevity, self-sufficiency, and adaptability in combat. Whether this is a response to player demand, an evolving game philosophy, or a precursor to even more punishing enemies, one thing is clear: sustained DPS isn't just a trend, it's becoming a defining feature of Wuthering Waves meta. So, what do you guys think? Are sustained DPS the future of Wuthering Waves? Or are we just coping while Kuro Games subtly prepares us for unavoidable power creep? Are we about to enter an era where the strongest players are those who can simply outlast their enemies, Drop a comment below with your hottest take, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more absurdly deep dives into the ever-evolving chaos of Wuthering Waves. Help this channel reach 3,000 subs. Thank you so much for watching. Maraming salamat po. And I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.